So here briefly is what we're going to cover. You'll have read that in the stuff sent out by Scribe. So because clerks are so well remunerated, and because I live in one of the most beautiful parts of the world, I bought myself a boat. Not this one, but Canva hasn't got a picture of a boat as crappy as mine. So there's a saying about boat owners that the two best days in their life are the day they buy it and the day they sell it. And they're not wrong. When I first got it, it looked fantastic. Painted hull, tidy cabin, proper little ship. I got the keys to the wheelhouse and felt like a captain. But here's the reality. You don't just get the wheelhouse, you also get the engine room. And mine came with a leaking water pump and a dodgy alternator. And the bellows on the boat, basically a 700-pound rubber seal, had perished, letting in water, threatening to sink her. And then there's the mooring fees, insurance, repairs, inspections, and safety gear. And if I'd taken command of a boat already at sea, well, you can't ignore the crew and the course that the boat is already on. So what looks like a bargain from the quayside can turn into a list of responsibilities that only gets longer. So why am I telling you about my boat? Well, here's the link. Transferring a community asset's a lot like inheriting a boat. It might look solid, it might feel exciting, but once it's yours, every creek, every wave, every storm is on you. We'll take a second to look at the official definition, and then I'll give you a no-nonsense version. It's basically the transfer of local authority assets to local councils. Sounds quite empowering, but I've put asset in quotation marks, and here's the reason why. If something costs you money every single year, if it drains your reserves, your time and your capacity, is it really an asset or is it actually a liability? If we clarify the terms, an asset is something you own that's got value, can generate income and appreciate in value or be sold for cash. So property, equipment, bank balances, investments. Now, if we compare that to a liability, something that you owe or something that takes money out of your pocket regularly, such as a loan, a lease, an ongoing service contract, or any obligation that requires payment. So here's an important question with asset transfers. What exactly are you being offered? Are you being transferred ownership, or are you being offered a 100-year full repairing lease? Because in financial terms, a 100-year full repairing lease isn't a gift. It's a massive responsibility. And I asked you whether the boat was an asset or a liability. Everybody was right. Some people said both. They were doubly right, because it could be either. One of the best days in the boat owner's life is when he sells it. Now imagine if instead of owning the boat, I'd agreed to maintain somebody else's, every repair, every inspection for 100 years. That's not an asset, that's a liability. So that's going to be the first point on our checklist. What are the terms of the transfer? Is it leasehold, a liability, or freehold, potentially an asset? And if it's freehold, is it a sunset clause in the transfer? So just thinking back, Mark Bleasdale said they're taking the parks on a 100-year lease. So it could be Disneyland at the end of it, but you're handing it back, having paid all that, put all that money into it to the county council. So it keeps the asset under democratic control, often more democratic, closer to the service users. It empowers local decision making, gives local control and tailored services, protects community services and spaces. And in some cases, but I think this is overstated, it can open doors to grant funding that principal authorities may not be eligible for. And the cons, well, financial liabilities, if you're tied to a lease, for example. Skills and expertise gaps. Most local councils don't have estates teams or in-house legal advice. long-term, ongoing maintenance, community expectations. If you're taking on a beloved building, it means taking on the hopes and complaints that come with it. And after all the excitement has died down, unless you're promising everything to everyone, how are you going to ensure people knuckle down and do the work? And then finally, I'm sure we all know we've got limited administrative capacity. Most of us are stretched quite thin already. So here's a thing that I want us to think about. Assets are rarely transferred during times of plenty. They're handed down in times of crisis when the budget's tight and someone higher up is looking to cut costs. They're passed on to us to save services, and providing public services is our raison d'être. But we can't allow ourselves to be sold a pup. We have to be strategic. We have to strike the best deal and build a plan that makes it sustainable. Goodwill won't fix the boiler, and wishes won't stop the roof leaking. So, second on our checklist is going to be a realistic business plan. And hopefully by the end of this webinar, everyone will have a good idea what goes into such a plan. Let me tell you what I walked into when I became clerk at Caernarfon Town Council. The council had accumulated quite a few assets and responsibilities over the years, but what we hadn't done, what we really hadn't grasped, was the risk. We were in 3 long-term leases. 2 of them were sublets, us leasing the building and letting it to a third party. And the council were tied in for 7 years, locking up a huge portion of our precept. But we had no reserves to cover the cost if the tenant pulled out or the project failed. We had a large public park, a children's playground, a 4-storey Grade 2 listed community centre, a shop repurposing children's equipment, and no one had properly considered the compliance and safety requirements that came with them. We had no condition surveys, no asbestos management, no Legionella risk assessments, hadn't done anything at all on Legionella. In the park, there was no regular hazard checks, no recorded playground inspections. And when I brought in an external auditor to look at our health and safety compliance position, I ended up with a 73-page report and 113 urgent recommendations. It's not just untidy paperwork, it's a risk to public safety, council finances, and potentially my position. Because under most health and safety legislation, while the council's the duty holder, you, the clerk, are likely to be the responsible person. And as the responsible person, you can be held personally liable if you ignore risks or fail to act on advice or mislead councillors about known issues. You don't have to own the building to carry the legal risk. If you're the one arranging fire alarm servicing, managing the keys and chasing repairs, you're probably the responsible person under law. So points 3 and 4 on our checklist. 3, have you identified, are you resourced and trained for the health and safety duties the asset brings with it? And 4, have you assessed the financial risk and made sufficient provision to reserves to cover it? Just in case health and safety comes across a little bit dry, liven things up and talk about insurance. First of all, it's not a one-off payment. It's an ongoing cost. And often, local councils won't get the same favourable terms a principal authority enjoyed. The principal authority may well carry larger excesses, or they may self-insure. They may have the budget to fix things without insurance. And that may not be practical for a local council. Your insurer will likely insist on a reinstatement valuation. They're not free. And one thing that's missed, and a full condition report, which you'll need anyway for your planning and your budgeting. And one thing that's easily missed most buildings are transferred after the original use has ended, and that often means they're empty, sometimes for months or years. And insuring an empty building isn't easy. In some cases, all you can get is flea cover, which is fire, lightning, earthquake, explosion, and impact of aircraft. And that's it. And even that will come with conditions. So, for example, and Nicole from Machynlleth will be aware of this, your insurer might insist you board the property to secure it, but Natural Resources Wales might refuse you permission to board it unless you've done a bat survey because the building's empty. So no bats were harmed when I learnt that lesson, but even with the survey, you'll hit hurdles. And while all this is going on, you might be uninsured. You'll have to turn off main services unless they're supporting alarms, and you'll have to carry out regular internal inspections. And that's why early engagement with your insurer is absolutely essential, so that you know the liabilities you're taking on. And it needs to happen before you sign a lease or agree to a handover date. You'll need to talk to them about your plans for the property. If it's a major refurbishment, you may require contract works insurance in addition to the property insurance. And as I said, they'll ask for a reinstatement valuation and a full condition report. Neither of those are going to be free. So negotiate with your principal authority to get one done before transfer, or include it in your budgeted costs along with the legal advice and all that to complete the transfer. And don't forget, even if you have them, they're going to need refreshing every few years. So you'll need to budget into reserves for full reinstatement cost surveys every 5 years, electrical installation condition reports, fire risk assessments, and all the other periodic checks. So point 5 on our checklist is going to be, have you spoken to your insurer? I've included a slide at the end with contact details of useful people. Colin Raffel's on that. I'm sure he'd be more than happy to advise on insurance. So let me tell you about Connah's Quay Town Council. In 2010, they took on a lease for a building and opened the Quay Cafe. Sounded like a good idea, community cafe, providing a community space and helping people with the cost of food. They had a business plan, but it was vague, optimistic, thin, and worse, it didn't address the key questions that an auditor would expect to see answered. There was no clear statutory power identified for the spending, no risk or sensitivity analysis, no hard challenge of income assumptions, and no fallback plan if the footfall didn't materialise. And it didn't materialise. By 2018, the cafe had run a cumulative loss of over £234,000, paid for through increased precepts. So higher council tax for everyone, every single year. The Auditor General produced a report in the public interest, which, in the absence of a proper parish council police, is about the strongest censure we can have. And the report said very clearly that the council had acted unlawfully because it didn't have the power at the time and it didn't have a sound basis for making the decision. So what the Auditor General said a proper business plan should include is a full budget. I've had business plans handed to me that show playgrounds and parklands and public toilets making a profit, which is, wishful thinking, overestimating income. And as the assets had been transferred from the county council, no charges were included for major costs like grass cutting or building repairs, because the department from whom it was being transferred didn't do the grass cutting, another department did. And the answer for what they do when the boiler breaks down was just, we just phone the property department and they fix it. So they've handed us accounts for the asset for 3 years, no repair costs at all in the 3 years on those accounts. You're going to need a clear explanation of which statutory power you're relying on and a plan for exit or recovery if the income doesn't meet expectations, which is another reason to go for freehold over leasehold, because the exit plan is to sell the asset then. So here are the exact words of the Auditor General regarding what should be in a business plan. I tell you what, don't read it now, because you'll get it on the slide. But one of the things they did say is an appraisal of options for delivery. Managing an asset directly through a precepting authority might not be the best governance structure. I was clerk at Caernarfon Town Council, and they spend tens of thousands a year on business rates for running the place, which is very similar to the Institute building of Caernarfon Town Council. And Caernarfon Town Council is corporate trustee of a registered charity. And because the Institute building's a registered charity, it pays 0 business rates. If you're setting up a different governance structure for that purpose or another purpose, get it set up as a legal entity before signing the lease or taking responsibility. So at Caernarfon, I've spent 2 years now unpicking a service that the council set up as a charity, but where the utility bills, the 7-year lease, staff contracts and everything were all set up in the name of the council. So back to point 2 on our checklist. You need a business plan that stands up to scrutiny. And would the business plan you've got survive a brush with the Auditor General? So just a slide here, the marketplace. You wouldn't pay the first price you're offered, or I wouldn't pay the first price I was offered if I was buying something in the market. So you need to negotiate. You need to push for freehold over leasehold, in my opinion. And then you're getting an asset to put against the liability that you're taking on. If it's a service or a building, an asset that's a liability that loses money every year, it's fair to be trying to negotiate a cash transfer. You know, if you take over a listed building, they're not cheap things to maintain. You're going to be saving the county council money over time. Part of the negotiation should at least be starting from getting the cash transfer with the building. Surveys, you'll need a full condition report, which you can get the transferring authority to do, I would think. An EICR, electrical inspection condition report, you'll need a new one because once you've transferred, because they have to be in the name of the people managing the property. But at least having one done will give you confidence that the electrics are in good condition. And you need the asbestos report for the property. And if you're going to drive a hard bargain, you have to be prepared to walk away. So here's where we get to. Community assets can be brilliant, and community asset transfers can be brilliant, and they can save services, protect spaces, and give communities a real stake in their future. But only if they're done with your eyes wide open. Not every transfer is going to be a good deal, and not every opportunity is worth the risk. Not every gift is worth unwrapping. So if you're offered an asset, you've got a checklist there to work through. And you've got the right questions to ask. And you've got a right to say, no thanks, not like this, not yet, or not without a plan. That's not being difficult, that's being competent, and that's being a clerk. So, diolch yn fawr. I'll hand you back to John.